welcome back to another reading and correcting of Bottom Rung by me, Kindar, and the Tiger Writes, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. Today we are doing Chapter 50. Tibs noticed someone else with the leather case while looking for the metal essence user who had attacked him. No guards had been called. Tibs wasn't about to involve them, since no one realized anything wrong had been done. Shoddy workmanship, the owner had grumbled and promised to those around him the builder would repay him for this. If the man hadn't been a noble, and Tibbs knew who his attacker was, he would have told them. One of the townsfolk wouldn't question Tibbs' help. This noble would accuse Tibbs of being in league with the other runner and would demand every runner be punished for daring looking at him, or something like that. The man with the leather case entered the Long in the Tooth tavern, while Tibbs continued toward the archery field. He'd already checked up the metal sorcerers, and while both were thin enough, they were too clumsy to have trailed them. He wanted to eliminate anyone who couldn't have done it before. Eliminate anyone who couldn't have done it before he focused on those who might have. If he was lucky, the one who'd done it would give himself away and Tibbs would find out why they wanted to kill him. Harry was an option. No matter how little he liked Tibbs, the guard leader would take the accusation seriously. With his ability to know the truth, it would be easy for him to find the right person. It would be the right things for the town. But Tibbs was street. On his street, you didn't pass on your problem to someone else, certainly not a guard. You might bring in friends, but not strangers. You dealt with the problem yourself. The archer was with the other Upsilons, practicing. Mez was there too, a look of concentration as he pulled on the string of his bow without an arrow notched to it. He was still trying to get the fire arrow to form. In contrast, the metal archer had an arrow on his bow and easily pulled it back. Something happened to the arrowhead. This was too far to sense it, but it shimmered as if someone had just polished it. The archer released it, and instead of embedding itself into the target, the arrow flew through the bale of hay it was attached to, leaving a feather to drift down from the hole it left behind. Mez snapped at the woman next to him and immediately looked regretful. She smiled and they exchanged a few words. She too pulled the string without an arrow, but one shimmered into place, made of fire, as she reached the furthest she could and glanced at Mez, who watched her intently and said something. Mez frowned and, "Can I help you?" an old archer asked Tibbs, looking him over. If you wanted to be an archer, you should have come on the first day, or at least go stand with the Omegas." He jerked his head in the direction of another group of people, most a few years older than him, but a few were adults. They were also shooting at targets attached to bales of hay, but mostly missing. Sometimes the entire bale. "Shouldn't there be more archers?" Tibbs asked. There had been roughly as many archers as there had been rogues among the first group, with the fighters being the largest and sorcerers the smallest. Now there hardly seemed to be any. The trainer sighed. "The nobles brought their own teachers, and they have a field outside of the town's limit. These are the ones who could pay for the privilege of running the dungeon, but nothing more, so I get them." He looked at their direction and shook his head. "Normally, I'm willing to bet good money my trainees will outshine any nobles within a few months, but these, well, at least they're enthusiastic." One of the women fired her bow and nearly shot a younger man who had gone to collect the arrows. "They haven't been to the dungeon, have they?" Survivors didn't have this level of energy after watching their teammates being killed. "Indeed," the man looked him over. "You sound like you've been in." "I'm Upsilon," Tibbs replied. The trainer's eye narrowed, then he nodded. "Then I have to ask what a rogue is doing on my training field. I hope you aren't thinking of trying for someone's pocket." "Mez is on my team," he replied. "He's having trouble, and I thought I'd come encourage him." He smiled at the man. "Rogues have more free time, which they should make better use of. Instead of bothering my trainees." He turned toward the Omegas. "If anyone complains something has gone missing, I will send the guards after you, light fingers." This was going to kick Bardic somewhere painful. had to be spreading the name around. It was the only way people Tibs had never talked to before knew it. He glanced at the metal archer as another arrow flew. This one made a hole much larger than the arrowhead and went in deep enough not even the shaft was visible. He considered the man's ability and decided that if he was the one who wanted him dead, he'd use an arrow. It would be more certain. He joined Maz, who glanced at him, then the target. He raised his bow, breathed in as he pulled the string, and cursed as nothing happened. You must focus on the essence of the arrow, the woman said in a tone that reminded Tibs of Alistair teaching him. The heat of the shaft, the breath of the fire, the breath of the fire on your cheek, the sun of the tip. I'm doing that, Maz grumbled. No, you aren't, she replied, and with a smooth motion had her bow up, pulled, arrow formed, and released it. It hit the target and washed over it, leaving burnt hay that boys and girls hurried to douse. No one shot while they performed their task. Mazzano, it isn't enough for you to feel the heat. You must know it. With a growl of announce, Mez took an arrow from the quiver at his hip, strung it as he raised the bow and pulled the string. Tibs felt the essence curse from the center of the archer's chest, his arm, hand, then the arrow. He released it with a breath, and the essence shifted in the arrow as it flew outside of Tibs's range. The explosion as it hit the target left a hole in the bale where it and the target on the other side had been. On either side, and the targets on either side had been. That, he said through gritted teeth, is heat. And it is one less arrow for you to use when you are out of essence, she replied calmly. I can buy more arrow, Amelia. What I can't do is make one. He looked at Tibs. Tell me how she did it. Tibs raised an eyebrow. Don't be silly, Mazzano. He isn't a fire user. How would he know anything? Mez began. Water? Tibs cut him off. His tone forceful enough, the archer had to get the message. The woman was momentarily surprised. You must be Tibs. I am Amelia of the family of the Light Heart. I don't remember seeing you before, he said cautiously. He couldn't know everyone who was still alive, but he thought he'd at least seen them all. I arrived when the dungeon reopened, she smiled. My mother felt this would benefit me more than simply studying about My mother felt this would benefit me more than simply studying under old Barnabas. You're a noble? Tibbs exclaimed in surprise. Her armor was clean, her bow in good condition, but nothing more than a runner. But nothing that a runner couldn't. At this, what the? But nothing that a. But no more. That of a runner. If they maintained it. If they maintained it. Tibbs, Mez warned. She's a noble, Tibbs replied, glaring at his friend. How could Mez be talking with her? Mez sighed. You have to forgive him, he told her, and Tibbs stared in shock. He's street, and where he's from the nobles are. He trailed off, and his shoulders slumped. Well, I'm sure you've seen how some of them are here. Some? Tibbs demanded. Where was the Mez who'd cursed all the nobles in town, rejoiced at the idea of letting them be the only ones to give coins to the guild? Tibbs. Mez chided him. He considered reminding the archer what he'd said in their room. See how well she took that. It's all right, Mazzano, she said, unapologetic. I am a noble, and I am well aware that in places that word is uttered as a curse. She offered Tibbs a smile. I am sorry you had to experience that kind of nobility, Tibbs. He eyed her suspiciously. There was no such thing as a nice noble, only a scheming one. How do you know I'm Tibbs? According to the stories told, there is only one water user whose eyes are still brown. If I understood correctly, it's because of your age. Tibbs fixed his gaze on Mez. Yes, it's my age. The archer looked away. I am pleased to meet you, Tibbs. Did you need Mazzano for something team-related? What do you want? Tibbs demanded of her. I'm afraid I. You're being nice, so you want something. He didn't feel like letting her take advantage of his friend. Tibbs. Beth sounded tired. She shook her head. I am not here wanting anything. In fact, I should ask you. I should ask what you need of me. of me. Within the limits of my duties to my training in the dungeon, I am here to serve. Tibbs was left speechless due to the lack of words to express how full of shit she was. After a few attempts, he turned and walked off. Walked off. Walked off. Walked off. A noble? Serve? Bess called after him, but Tibbs ignored him. Let him get used to that. Let him get used by noble if that was what the archer wanted. Tibbs had warned him. Mez had seen what they did. Any misery was on him now. He stepped off the archery field and onto the street. As he stepped off the archery field and onto the street, he saw Tandy. When she was looking, when she was, when she was, oh, sure. Sure. He'd noticed her, she nodded to an alley. He considered ignoring her. He wasn't in a mood to be social. What he wanted was a roof and running. Some noble's home with a window to open, even if it was daylight. Maybe she nodded to the alley with more insistence. And he sighed. He could still run a roof after he had listened to her. Are you okay? She asked. He clamped his mouth shut and did his best not to glare. She might not be on his team, but she was Karina's friend, a fellow rogue who was helping him learn how to throw knives. I had a running with a noble, he said once he had his temper under control. Is it something the guards are going to hear about? He shook his head. Even if he did something, they wouldn't know. What do you need? She studied him before speaking. Our team talked it over and PN wanted me to tell you we agree with Jackal. We'll pass the word on to the teams we know. In a few days, every runner will know not to bother with trying to climb the schedule. Tibbs nodded. He didn't want to ask the next part. He hadn't mentioned it when he told the plan to Tandy because it didn't matter if they didn't go along with it. But now, if it didn't happen, it would turn bad at some point. Do you know anyone who gets along with Dawn enough to inform him of what we're doing? Why the fuck would you want to let that asshole in on the plan? She demanded, showing more fire than Tibbs thought the meek woman was capable of. He's just going to tell the guild to make himself look better in their eyes. We're not breaking rules, so it doesn't matter if he tells them. They're going to work it out on their own anyway. They just had Harry worded the way he did to make us think it was a good idea. Tibbs didn't doubt Jekyll that Harry had known what he was telling them wasn't needed, but after his few interaction, after his few interaction with the man, he couldn't imagine him decided to do this. It was more something Tyrannia would want. If we don't tell Dawn, he's going to find a way to cause trouble when he realizes we didn't include him. Maybe he's going to tell the nobles and they're going to stop paying. If no one plays the guild's game, then they're going to change the rules. She thought about it and sighed unhappily. I don't know anyone who gets along with that man. They all either kiss his boots because they're afraid of his essence, or they hate him because he's already done something to them. But I do know someone who's cozy with his rogue. It's the only way I can think to get him the message. The message. Tibbs nodded. Don't tell him. Don't tell him my team came up with the idea. He might do something stupid just to make our life miserable. Is this about taking Mazzano from him? Tibbs shook his head. It started before that. The man's an asshole. He's easy to hate and to piss off. I'm happy I managed to avoid him, she said. She took a folded pieces of paper and handed it to him. This is the list of Team PN things would be good to train with. She wants Jekyll to check if there's anyone there your team can't work with. He stared at the paper. Did you pay for that? She chuckled. I'm a rogue, Tibs. Why pay when I can take? A quick distraction and I have a page. Amit and Jeff know how to read and write. Tibs took it and unfolded it. The letters were scribbled in lines of charcoal and the paper's edge were unevenly frayed. You broke it? Paper's valuable. This is all you needed for the information. I'm keeping the rest. He nodded and folded it along the crease. How many can you get before a merchant notices? He asked, really hating the idea that was forming. Not a lot. Why? He bit his lower lips. I need to think it over and check something. We might not need much. Not if they were very careful. If you're asking me to steal for you, Tibs, I'm going to have to be paid. He smiled. If my idea works, that might be payment enough. Kumdar was the last to join them in their room. Tibs was tired. It had taken longer to get his team together than he'd expected, and now all he wanted to do was sleep. Jekyll pushed a stool to the cleric with a foot, since his bed was the furthest away from Tibs. We're all here, Tibs, Jekyll said. What's this important idea you have? First, I need to check something. He yawned. When Harry told us the rules, he said that we can't talk about the dungeon outside of it, right? I mean, that's how he said it. He looked at the other expectantly. It's how I remember it, Jekyll said. I think it is, Karina agreed. Tibs looked at Mez. Oh, now my opinion matters? Mez, Jekyll warned. Fine, yes, that's how I remember he told it. Tibs nodded. Then I think I have an idea how we can learn about how the other teams did on their runs. Jekyll leaned forward. This should be good. Tibs took a slow breath. We use the letters to pass the information among the teams. Jekyll blinked. Say that again? We write the information down. Jekyll shook his head and rubbed his ears. There's no way I heard that right. It sounded like you said we read something. He stared at Tibs. I barely know my letters and you know less than I do. It'll never work. And the guards will punish us if they find out. As said. Mez stated. Tibs shook his head. They can't. We won't be breaking the rules. Everyone knows that when they say we can't talk about it, they meant passing information along in any way, the usher replied with a roll of the eyes. How do we know that? Kierna asked, pensive. How many runners know their letters? She looked at them. The guild isn't teaching them. I don't think they care if anyone other than sorcerers know how to read and write. Are probably counting on it. She looked at Tibs. You do understand what that means, right? He nodded. I'm no more happy about my idea than Jekyll is. Forgive me, but I fail to understand why you would be unhappy about the idea you just had, Tibs. Kumdar looked around. Unless I misunderstood, it is an excellent idea. We use the definition of the rule rather than its intent. Decide. But it means I have to learn my letters now. Me and Jack... nope! The fighter was on his feet. I am not learning those atrocious things. Jackal, we have to, Tibs said. We can't ask Karina and Kumdar to be the only ones doing this. It wouldn't be fair. It's okay, Tibs, Karina said, and he stared at her. I'll start teaching you. I'm certain that once Jackal sees how useful it is, he'll change his mind. Jackal snorted. You will wither away from old age before I ever change my opinion on letters. He looked at Tibs. I really thought we were allies against them, Tibs. I can't express to you how disappointed I am you're joining the letters our good side. Tibs squared his shoulder and looked at the fighters. It's what's best for the team, he said resolutely, and yawned so wide his jaw cracked. Maz stepped up to his bed, looking as unhappy as Tib felt at not being allowed to sleep yet. You have no right speaking to him. You had no right speaking to Amelia that way. Did you tell her? Tibbs countered on the same angry tone. Tell her what? You know exactly what, Mez. You were going to tell her I have fire before I stopped you. I'm sorry, Mez replied through clenched teeth. I shouldn't have, but I was a child. The archer glared at Tibbs. The archer glared at Tibbs, who demanded, Tell me that's what a man would do. His lips became lines as he took a slow breath. It isn't, he finally said. I am sorry. Tibbs nodded. Are you going to listen to me now, or are you going to get angry defending that noble? I will listen. The words were calm, but the archer's hands were clenched into trembling fist. I've seen nobles walk my street with smiles and sweet. They offer both to take anyone accepting away. They take both and take anyone accepting either away. I've watched kids go with some. Not all come back alive. Their bodies are found days later. Those who come back breathing aren't really alive either. Whatever those nobles do, it takes something out of them. Some don't even bother going back to their home. They'll have the guards clear an alley and do it right there where we can all hear the kids scream, plead for them to stop. We all have to listen to the sickening sweet reassurance from that noble that the kid's going to be better for letting this happen. How special it makes them. And it's not just what you're thinking. Some will take blades, glass, fire to them. Sometimes they won't even bother with that and use fists and kicks. I have never seen a noble step onto my street and have something good happen because of it. The archer's red. The archer's orange-red eyes were bright. Heat radiated from him as he shook, as if he was trying to keep himself from erupting. But when he spoke, his voice was ice. Amelia isn't like that. How do you know? Tibs snarled. Have you followed her? Have you seen her when she doesn't have to worry about How do you know? Tibs snarled. Have you followed her? Have you seen her when she doesn't have to worry about what others can do to her? This town is ours only so long as we don't let them take it from us. If they do, they're going to find a street to hem us in, and they'll never let us escape it. We're runners, Mez replied, and the heat increased. We faced a dungeon. There's nothing they can do that's worse than that. Except make you think they're nice, Tibs replied. Mez closed his eyes and breathed as the heat settled at very hot. Tibs glanced about, surprised nothing was on fire. The archer let out a breath, unclenched his hand, and the room was suddenly cool. I am sorry, Tibs. I am sorry that you have seen the horrors you have at the end of nobles. I believe you when you say they can be horrible. Huh. Okay. It can be horrible. I believe that now. But I refuse to believe they are all like that. I refuse to believe it because one day I will bear the title of noble, and I will never be like that. That's you, not no, Tibs. If I can be like that, others can too. Others are. People can't be better if you refuse to give them a chance. If I give them the chance, I know what they'll do. Mez nodded. Then I hope I will be able to show you different. He opened his eyes. He opened his eyes and they no longer burned. And I want to thank you, Tibs. For what? He asked cautiously. The inferno is no longer burning. I understand what you meant about my element and the essence. A flame traveled from one side of his body to the other. I also understand why it isn't something that can be explained beyond what you told me. Don't cause Amelia trouble, Tibbs. I'd ask that you don't cause any of the nobles trouble, but some deserves all the trouble you can foster on them. Just leave Amelia out of it. Is she your special girl? The archer shook his head. She's just a noble I can look up to. One that back home would make everyone proud. The kind of noble I wasn't sure existed outside of my home anymore. Okay. If she doesn't do anything in my town to hurt us, I won't do anything to her either. As nodded. I wish you a good sleep, Tibbs. And you have fun shooting fire arrows. Mess seemed surprised by the comment, then looked at his hand. I guess I will go try. I will go find out. And this concludes chapter 50 of Bottom Rung. If you are enjoying this, subscribe, hit the bell, share, hit the thumbs up. If you want to read the rest of the story, it is on Royal Road. The link is in the note, as is the link to my Patreon, should you want to support me. And with that, I shall wish you a good day.